Vítám vás opět v Gutenberg Hall na dnešní druhé přednášce a předávám slovo našemu dalšímu speakerovi. Okay, so the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Everyone can hear me in the back? Yeah, okay, that's fine. So hello, everyone. My name is Wojtek Kalicin. I came here from Warsaw, where I'm the leader of GDG Warsaw, and I'm also a Google developer expert in Android. Now, if some of you are not familiar with the developer expert program, that basically means if you have a problem with Android, with the frameworks or Play services or anything at all, and if you can find me online, maybe I can help you. But disclaimer, that doesn't mean I work for Google, though I can try and help you with like getting whitelisting for APIs or figuring bugs in the Play services or support libraries and so on. So I can get you in touch with the right people and try to help you developers. Okay, so this is a short introduction about me. You can find me on Google+, or you can scan my badge later if you want to talk about the developer expert program or anything at all. And moving on to the title of the presentation. Actually, it doesn't say much, right? That's because I came up with the title when KitKat was announced, but it wasn't released yet, actually. So I had to do a presentation for our DevFest in Warsaw, and I knew it was kind of going to be about KitKat, but I didn't know anything about the subject yet, because even us developer experts don't get any information on unreleased products. So yeah, but then I kind of started thinking if I could make it not only about what's new in Android 4.4, but kind of reflect on the state of Android and us developers on the platform. Where are we at, and what's the status of the platform? So yeah. As you know, Android is moving at an amazing pace, and we have hundreds, if not thousands, of devices out right now, from small ones to tablets, phablets, or what do you call these 7-inch phones that you can use as tablets. We have old versions of Android, new versions of Android. So yeah, here's a stack of Nexus devices, and I guess the question is, which are the droids that we're looking for, right? Which Androids do we develop for as developers? Is it the old phones, the new phones, the tablets? Which is the most important? Do we develop Nexus devices and like assume that it works on all of the rest? Or do we target tablets or only phones? Do we make two applications that are totally different? That's kind of the question I want to explore here. And before I go to the next slide, I just want to do a quick test. I want to see if I'm right, or maybe it's different here. How many of you develop for Android? Okay, so let's assume every Android version has like a percentage of the market, right? So I'm going to go down from, let's say, 30%, and raise your hands if you're prepared to drop support for that Android version if like 30% of the market, let's say 30% of the market is Android 2.3. Will you drop support for it? Will you not develop apps if it's at 30%? No. Okay, what about 20%? Some people, okay, 15%? And keep holding your hands up, all the people who said like 20, 15, 10? 10%, that seems to be the thing. And 5%, that's probably all of you. Okay, so before I went to Android development, I was a web dev for a long time, and we did this survey among our GDG members, which was in web development, right? So we asked back then, a few years ago, what is the percentage of the market that Internet Explorer 6 needs to have for you to drop support for that awful, awful browser? And as you can see, 10% is the mark, right? So just as you said, 10% people are prepared to drop support for the old code, the old platform versions. And it seems to be the same case with Android. But as you can see from the dashboard on the Play console, I mean the Android developers site, we're not really there, right? Because Gingerbread or 2.x versions are still a big part of the pie. So we can say that 3/4 of the devices are on new platform versions, but we still have this almost 30% of legacy Android versions, 2.x. And what can we do to support them? What have we been doing all the time to support all these versions? Well, as you probably know, we have the support library released by Google. So we used it for the action bar. Now that action bar compat has been released. Before that, we had other third-party libraries like action bar Sherlock. We can also support unified themes. So if we want our app to look everywhere as nicely as on the new devices, we use things like Holo Everywhere, which provides the styles and the unified kind of look of the platform. Animations framework, I've been using the 9 old Androids library. And we also can use fragments and loaders thanks to the support library. So it looks like we can do all this stuff, right? It's not a problem. We can support older versions and move on to the next. But not everything's as nice as it seems. What about newer UI classes, like the views that don't exist in earlier versions? Or some of the views have new options that you would want to use, but it's kind of hard to backport them. Some of them are in the support library, not all of them. What about moving from like legacy classes that were used before to newer ones? When do you decide to drop support for something like Android HTTP client and move on to the now recommended by Google HTTP URL connection, or even some of the new libraries like Volley or other third-party libraries? Well, you can do that, but it needs some kind of effort, right? But then there are things like audio and video codecs that were introduced in newer platform versions, and there's not really much you can do about it. You would like to use WebP, for example, the new image format by Google that lets you send less data through the network and save some storage space on the device. Well, that's not really feasible. What about things like GPU acceleration to get these smooth animations and really get the most of your devices? That's impossible to do, right? You have to have framework support. So there's not really, we can't really support everything if we have to keep this legacy code around. And that's not nice. And why is it not nice? Because in the earlier days, it sufficed to just push out your app to the market as soon as you had it. And if you were the first, like if you had the first, I don't know, photo editing app, or if you had the first Twitter client, or whatever app you can think of, it was first on the market. So people would download it, and they wouldn't look at it if it's the best, good, bad. If it worked, they would use it. That's not the case right now. Right now, we have tons of apps on the market, lots of official apps, clones, third-party clients for different services. And you have to compete in an entirely different space. Even a long time ago, I guess, Google disabled the top new apps on Play Store in some places because it just became a fire hose of the stuff people were churning out at an amazing pace. And it didn't really make sense to have all these apps like highlighted in their own category. That's why right now you need to create apps and think about design, innovation, and efficiency. And these three pillars can, well, not make sure, but help you put out an app that people will notice and download and want to keep forever. And it's becoming more difficult to do this when you have to support all this legacy code in Android 2.x, right? If you have to pull in all those libraries and make compromises. Decide, okay, I'm not going to use this new format because I can't use it, because I still have to support older devices. And as I said, app quality is what can make you money. This is a graph showing the purchase rate, or the money you can get from applications based on the number of stars. So you can see quality is important, and I guess that's logical. But you want to be in the top, right? You want to have 5 stars and get more money from your apps. So at Google I/O this year, one of the attendees came up with an initiative that he called MinSDK version 14. Now that's ice cream sandwich, if you remember correctly. And he gave out these stickers and started preaching to the people that were at the conference to start moving on and just leaving the older platforms behind. And why? Why SDK version 14? Because that's when Android became serious, right? That's where the platform matured and kind of left all that legacy stuff behind. So this is a history, right? This was some time ago, but just to summarize, now we have Hello everywhere without additional libraries, without pulling all this stuff. We have the promise from Google that every Android device that has Google Play will have the untouched Hello theme. So that's nice. We don't have to worry about customizations anymore. We have finally a clean and consistent UI and a whole set of design patterns and best practices, not only for UI, but also for the UX, and a great developer site to support that. So I encourage you to read all of that and do that in your apps. Finally, it's the first version that unifies support for phones, tablets, and every screen size in between. And we also get the action bar, fragments, loaders, the animation framework that's actually smooth thanks to GPU acceleration, and we get that for free. So you don't have to worry about, again, pulling in lots of code just to support that. And one of the important things for you, again, about monetization is that people actually buy more on the new phones and tablets. So it's almost over twice the purchase rate on newer Android devices running ice cream sandwich or more, and 1.7 purchase rate on tablets. So this kind of gives you a perspective on the 30% I was talking about earlier that Gingerbread still has. When you take this into account, that's becoming less important to support all these older devices, right? And you can start thinking about moving to ice cream sandwich and above. But at the same time, I'm not asking you to drop support for everything right now. If you have a big user base, if you have an app out there on the market that you went all this way to support 2.3 or 2.x devices, you can still have it. Thanks to new options I'll introduced some time ago on the Play Store, you can actually have multiple APKs for your application. So if you have your old version of your app, you can leave it there for all the people who downloaded it, and they can still have their 2.x version, while at the same time you can move your resources, your developers, your time, and your code to a new code base and start developing your new, better, more optimized app. And in some time, like probably in less than half a year, what I'm saying here about 2.x devices will probably be out of date, and we'll be speaking the same thing about ICS. And again, you can use the same mechanism to drop support for any version you deem too costly to develop anymore, and just move on to the next. Use new APIs. Don't worry about not giving the people who downloaded your app access to it anymore. And while we're here talking about the SDK versions and making your app work best on the device the user has, just to clear up some confusion for those of you who don't know, there's actually another setting you can set in the manifest. That's the target SDK. And you can actually make your app work better without changing any of the code if whenever a new Android version comes out, you change the target SDK version to be the maximum that's out there, test your app. If everything works correctly, just publish on the Play Store with a new target SDK, and you can get some benefits like a new UI, less support compatibility versions from the platform. So Min SDK is just for filtering, right? It's the minimum SDK that minimum Android version that the Play Store will let your users install on their devices. And the target SDK is actually a hint at runtime to the system to apply some tweaks that will help your app work better. So if you're not doing this, start just raising the target SDK and re-uploading your apps. And don't use the Max SDK. That's just not needed unless there's some kind of emergency and your app breaks on the new version. But that's usually not the case with apps that have been written correctly. OK, so after this quite lengthy introduction, let's move on to what's new in KitKat, right? We have a new Android version. It's the second point release this year. We already had 4.3. 4.4 came out just less than a month ago. Some of you may have it on your phones, Nexus 5 or Moto X or whatever. And there's some goodies that I want to talk about that are most visible to users, because it's mostly developer APIs. But I highlighted some of the features that can make your app stand out and really work like magic and be the best app on the market right now. So we'll go through some of the APIs. I won't go into detail with code or anything. That's what the developer side is for. But maybe you'll get some inspiration and think of the places in your app where you can use those APIs. So for some time now, from Ice Cream Sandwich, we had these flags we can use on our applications that will hide the on-screen navigation buttons, the ones at the bottom. So if you're, for example, watching a video, instead of seeing the buttons all the time, they would just shrink to little dots that would not distract the user. That's nice. But then in Jelly Bean, we got some more flags that could let us hide the status bar and hide the icons so that the user could watch a video and not be distracted by anything. But then again, if the user taps the screen, all of this stuff comes back because there has to be a way of navigating away, and you need the buttons for that, the on-screen buttons. So KitKat finally introduces a fully immersive mode, a full screen, a truly full screen experience for your apps, where you can hide all of the Chrome, all of the controls on the screen, and actually, if the user touches the screen, all of the touch events get sent directly to your app. So no compromises there, right? Let's see how it looks. So let's say you're reading a book, right? And this is the default with all this stuff that's distracting you. Then we, on Jelly Bean, we could do something like show more of the text and less of the Chrome. And finally, on KitKat, we can do full screen and not worry about showing any of the unneeded controls. To get back from this view, you just swipe down from the top of the screen, and the Chrome comes back. So that's nice. Another thing when talking about the UI is something you might have seen in the Google Chrome and Google Maps applications for some time now. These were actually made into design guidelines that are supposed to be used in your apps from KitKat and above. So there is this gesture in Google Chrome where you double tap on a piece of text, and it will zoom in to fit the text to your screen. So that is one thing. Another thing, I don't know if you've noticed, if you double tap, then hold your finger on the screen and drag up or down. That works in Chrome and Maps. It will zoom in and zoom out. So it's kind of the same as a pinch gesture, but you can do it with one finger. And yeah, you should start supporting that in your apps too, starting with KitKat at least. Because that's what people will expect. They will come from the Google apps. They will come to your app, double tap and drag, and they will wonder why it's not working. So that's why. Oh, sorry, it should say transitions at the top. So we have a whole new transitions framework. So this builds on the animation framework that we have since ICS or even Honeycomb. Using the new cool animations, the smooth animations between views is nice, but there's even a nicer way. If you have a whole layout of your app, like let's say some buttons, some text and labels, and if you want to smoothly transition to the next one, let's say a user presses a button and you want to rearrange stuff on the screen, instead of writing all these animations by hand and saying like, let's move this control up and this one down, and let's expand the text after clicking the label, you can do all of this automatically now by defining the first state and the second state, and just call the transition manager from KitKat. And it will move all your controls, resize them, fade in the new views, fade out the old views, and adjust the bounds. And it's really a nice tool. So I recommend you start using it to make your apps look really smooth and to have really nice transitions in your app. Another framework introduced in KitKat is the storage access framework. Now, this consists of 3 parts. So client apps, the apps that you usually make, work on data, right? They want to open files, manage files. They want to pick a photo that you want to upload somewhere, like to a social network. So yeah, they want to open a file. The second part is providers. So we have apps that usually gather all this data, like Dropbox or Google Drive or Box.net. These are cloud storage apps, but it can be really anything. It can be an app that manages your songs on your device or manages your photos and lets you sort them by tags, for example, or location. So it can be any app that provides data to other apps. And then the third part is the picker, which is actually part of the system since KitKat. And it's just a system user interface for, well, picking the files you want to open or manage. So why do we have that? We could always do that on Android, right? Previous Android versions, we could send an action pick intent with the file type we wanted to open, like let's say an image, a JPEG. And all these apps would come up and saying, hey, I provide images. You can open image files with me. But they would all volunteer with their own UIs, right? So after saying, I want to pick an image, you would have to pick one app, and that app would have to implement a UI for you to use. And these UIs were different. You couldn't move from one app to another. So right now, we have a new intent called action open document or action create document. And if you send that intent to the system, it shows the system-wide picker that highlights all these apps that participate in the framework. So this is the UI for the storage access framework picker. And you can see at the top all the apps that advertise as providers in this framework are present. And so if you want your app to be really successful as a provider, you should probably ensure that it's up there with the others, right? And if you want your app to work smoothly, if you want to pick something, then you would probably want it to use the picker so it's consistent with the rest of the system. Moving on, we have a new printing API. That's something that was long coming, right? There wasn't an easy way on Android to manage printing. So there's actually two parts to this. I guess the most popular will be adding printing to your applications. So if you want to print something, you can now easily do that. There are some classes in the framework that if you implement, you can get a callback whenever a user touches a print button. And you need to generate a PDF file that will be sent off to the framework and printed on whichever device is used by your system for this task. To make things easier, there's actually a PDF document class that provides you a canvas And if you have a canvas, you can just call like view.draw on a canvas, and your whole view hierarchy of your application, or whatever you choose, will be drawn to that canvas and sent out for printing. So it's really easy, really a fast way to add printing capabilities to your application. And the other side, for all these OEMs, device manufacturers, or even people who provide like email to fax services. So it doesn't have to be a physical device, it can be a virtual device. You can implement your own printing service, which is basically an APK. So printer manufacturers can provide you with, let's say, drivers for their printers through the Play Store. So it's really easy. Next thing, SMS provider. There used to be apps that let you manage your SMS messages, the text messages on your phone. But to date, there wasn't an official API to do this. Finally, in KitKat, we have something called the SMS provider. And it lets you manage, delete, save text messages on your phone. But to do that, introduces actually a concept of the default messaging app on your phone. So in order to actually do this, in order to actually be able to write to the provider, your app has to be a default messaging app that you set in your phone settings. And there are some implications of that. And if you work on apps like this, I suggest you go to the Android developers blog and look up one of the recent posts about how to make your SMS app work as it should on KitKat. Yeah, so these are just some of the APIs that were introduced with 4.4. I encourage you to go on YouTube and other developer resources provided by Google. And there's like a 10-minute video about every API that came out. And also, I didn't highlight it here, but there's also a really nice show called Android Design in Action that talks about some of the changes in design and in KitKat. Like, for example, we don't have this blue hollow highlights anymore. We now have gray, white kind of highlights so that they don't clash with your branding color. Like if it's orange or something, you don't want to have blue buttons, right? So I encourage you to go on YouTube and watch all these videos, really lots of exciting stuff. And since we have some time left, in the description of my presentation, I also said that I'll talk about some of the tools. Well, you probably know that it's not all about Logcat, right? You can't use Logcat to like debug everything about your application. So there's a new tool in KitKat that's called Process Stats, or ProcStat for short. You can use it from the shell, from ADB, or from the Android Studio tools. But there's also a way to access it on device. And basically what it is, it lets you analyze, like in a very visual way, the amount of resources your app needs to run, or over the time of your app being on the system. How much RAM does it take? What is the highest amount of RAM it takes? What is the average? How many background services have run, right? How many percent of system resources did they consume? And why is that important on KitKat? Because KitKat was designed and optimized to work even on 500 megabytes devices, like devices with 500 megabytes of RAM. So if your device has 512 megabytes of RAM, probably some of the more complicated apps will just crash and give out an out-of-memory error. So you want to analyze your app usage. And there's actually a new API, just a method call called isLowMemory device. And you can actually use that on runtime to see if you're running on this kind of device and maybe disable some features. Maybe scale down the bitmaps a notch if you have like a photo editing app. Maybe you can, be easy on the resources on your phone because it can be really crowded on an Android device. Another tool you can use to write the best apps possible is the RTL layout in the developer options. So basically, if you develop an app for a global audience, there's obviously some languages that are right to left. And before this, to test it, you would have to switch to a language you probably don't know and look at all your layouts not only from right to left, but in completely unreadable characters. So now you can do this in English or Czech or whatever language you're using and just be able to switch between normal and right to left. And something that will maybe not help you with development, but with publishing your apps and making promotional videos, that's something that was long requested by developers. We finally have screen recording. So you can access it via the console or Android Studio, and you can record an MP4 video that actually has a pretty nice frame rate. I think it's either 30 or 60 FPS, and have a really smooth video of your device in action. And one more thing, if you enable the developer option called, I don't remember what it's called, it's about showing touches on your screen. You can actually record like a demo, and there will be like these small dots whenever you touch on the screen. So that's really nice. And let's not forget some of the tools that were introduced during the last years, and not all of you are probably using them or are aware of their existence. Since Jelly Bean 4.3, we have GPU profiling on the device. And you can also enable it in the developer options on the phone. And I don't know if you can see that. There's actually a green line on the graph at the bottom of the screen. And it tells you where the 60 FPS threshold is. So if you watch the bars while scrolling lists or doing stuff in your app, if any of the bars go above the green line, that means you're doing it wrong, and your app will not run smoothly at 60 FPS. And well, basically, it's a sign that you need to dive deeper and find out what's wrong and how you can optimize to always stay below the line. And one of the things you want to look at is probably GPU overdraw. So it's another tool you can enable on your device. And it basically shows you, for each pixel on the screen, it shows you how many times this pixel had to be drawn by the device, by the framework. So these colors ranging from blue, green, red, they show you if this pixel was drawn once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. And basically, you should target drawing at most twice on each pixel on the screen. So if you have like very small areas where it's red and the rest is blue, that's probably fine. But if you find a red area that covers half of your screen, that means you have to dive into that view that you created and see if you're like drawing a background over a background over a background and then some text on it, and try to optimize it. OK, since time's almost up, that's it. That's what I prepared. And if you have some questions, please. And remember, you can find me online, add me on Google+, and what I said in the beginning. If you have any problems that no one else can help, I can at least try, but I can't promise anything. Questions? There are some additions to the support library, like, for example, if you want to use the new gestures, there's like a gesture compat something that will make your app not crash on previous devices. The transitions framework is not in the support library. So you either have to use a third-party library. I think there's already one on GitHub, so you can find it, or wait until probably that could be added to the support library, but I don't know. But still, you can add the transitions and just not use them on previous versions. So on previous versions, the views would just switch. And on the KitKat version, they would fade in and so on. OK, thank you very much.